Thank you for making it to another episode of the Money Exchange podcast. And if you're watching us, for being here with It's My Money with Patrina Dixon. I'm so excited. Y'all, I have a really great guest on. She and I connected through FinCon, and I can't wait for her to share her story with you all. If you're first time seeing me, you don't know who I am. My name is Patrina Dixon. I am the It's My Money lady. I do everything personal finance. I call myself the one that teaches the fundamentals. So you have to have the right foundation before you start building that house, before you put the roof on. So I make sure that everybody has all of the fundamental information as it pertains to personal finance. So you can find me across social media at It's My Money _. So let's jump into this episode. Our episode today is going to talk about buying real estate out of state in short-term rentals. So I know so many people are interested in real estate, and I got my girl, Crystal Cardozo, who is going to give us the gems on how she and her husband successfully do that. And with that, Christina, welcome to the show.
Hi, Patrina. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and talking about my experience in buying real estate out of state. It's not as challenging as people think about that it could be. So I'm just excited to be here with you.
Yes, I'm excited to have you. You and I chatted just, as a follow up to meeting each other and then hearing about the great things that you're doing from a real estate perspective. So before we get into that, because you also are a math coach for a student. So tell a little bit about that, because I think that's important to the conversation as we get into real estate, like how you got into being a math coach.
Yeah, so I've always had this obsession, even as a kid, with numbers and with math. And I just always had a passion also for education. So I actually started my education field with teaching high school and college level math. And then more recently, in like the last 7 years, I've become a math coach. So the same way like a financial coach would help support people, like as a math coach, I'm supporting teachers. So teachers, specifically now, I work in elementary school. So working with kids as young as kindergarten to up to fifth grade. So I'm supporting teachers, working with a team to do curriculum, analyze tests. So that's my full-time day job. But apart from that, I'm also a real estate investor. And I also love this personal finance space. It's a passion of mine.
So now with the experience that you just shared, and tell us, how long have you been purchasing, like buying real estate? And then tell us your various roles within the process of purchasing real estate, specifically out of state.
Yeah, so I do live in New Jersey, and we started, and when I say we, I mean my husband and I, we started buying real estate 10 years ago. And 10 years ago is when we got started, but we were looking for a property to live in. At the time, we were looking at apartments, and it just didn't make sense to rent an apartment at that time. And we're like, wow, if we just save a little bit of money, we can just buy this real estate property. And that's exactly what we did. But we did the house hacking way. So for those of you who are not familiar with house hacking, it just means that you're buying a property. Sometimes it could be a single family, sometimes it could be a duplex or larger, but you are living in one part and you're renting out another part in order to cover most or almost all of the living expenses. And so that's how we got started. And that was what kind of like at that point, that's kind of when the light bulb went off, like, wow, like the power of real estate investing. We just taken one of our largest expenses, which was housing, and we pretty much brought it down to almost zero by using this house hacking way of living. And so after we did that, it was a few years before we rented out the whole house, and then we bought a larger house, and we're currently still in that larger house. So then we became landlords. So we had a long-term rental still in New Jersey, and we were renting that other primary, that first house that we bought, and then it was not only paying for itself, but it was also paying for like half of our new mortgage. So again, we saw the power of that. We actually ended up selling that house because the people who were living in the house actually told us that they wanted to buy the house from us. Our tenants wanted to buy the house from us. So we did that. And then with those funds, we decided, because we felt really comfortable, because that first house was a bit of a fixer upper, we felt comfortable getting into flips. So we started delving into that. And I will say that became like a full-time job, and it wasn't really what we were going for. And it wasn't as easy as HGTV makes it look like. Fast forward a few years and learning curves with that, we wanted specifically to buy a vacation rental property. And so then, because we were at first looking for another long-term rental, but the cash flow wasn't around anymore in New Jersey. Like it wasn't like how it was 10 years ago. Houses had just skyrocketed even more in New Jersey. When you're living like in an expensive state, like, on the East Coast, we just started realizing that the value of our dollar goes a lot farther when you're out of state.
Yeah.
And so that's what led us to like purchasing properties out of state. We started buying in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, and we realized that we can get a lot more for our money. And then we later bought in Wisconsin and 2 more in Missouri.
Okay, so wait, let me pause you there for a second. So a lot of people, I think the concept of house hacking, people have been doing that for a long time, and will probably continue in that vein, especially when starting out. And then you did long term, and then now you're into buying out of state, and then we're going to get into the short term rental piece of it. But my question before we go further is, how did you know which states to purchase in, seeing that you live in New Jersey, continue to live in New Jersey? How did you know those were the locations that would give you the right return? One, the price seemed right for you, and that it would give you the return that you talked about you enjoyed 10 years ago.
So I will say, like, upon our journey, you don't know until you're actually in this space. So for example, when we decided we want a vacation rental, we said, all right, we're going to start connecting with realtors. Also, a big tip that I would say is wherever you're thinking, if you are on Facebook, which that's my favorite place to be, to join groups, join whatever area you're looking for, find a Facebook group for that location. If you're looking to buy a property in the Poconos, well, there's a Poconos short-term rental Facebook group. I always like to start with that because it kind of gives me an idea when people are really looking for properties, how, like, are people trying to sell properties? Like, you just get an idea, because even though you're out of state, you could be over 1,000 miles away, you're still getting all this insight because you're connecting with maybe local people over there.
There's a lot of people that are not on Facebook. Are there other resources that they can get similar information that they would in the Facebook groups that you mentioned?
Well, I have most experience with Facebook groups, and that's where I've done most of my networking. But yeah, there are apps called like Meetup. And so on the app called Meetup, you can actually connect with other real estate investors, and then you can have a Zoom session. And, I was just on a real estate meetup not too long ago, and there was over 75 people on this real estate Zoom call, and everybody's kind of introducing themselves. And then we went into like smaller breakout rooms and then just connected with people, right? If you specifically say, listen, I'm in New Jersey, but I already have a few properties in Missouri, anybody else out in Missouri? And you might be surprised. Maybe someone there in that group is not, but they might be able to connect you with somebody who is, that might be able to give you that insight. I think it's easier if you can join some type of group, like a Facebook group specifically in that area. A lot of them are active. They'll share their Airbnb, they'll share their contractors, they'll share their realtors. Like, people are very open whenever you have questions, and they're willing to help you out.
Through the Facebook group or through the Meetup app, you now have, I'll call it a network of real estate folks that are in the real estate market. But still, there is work. You live in New Jersey, you have a property in the Poconos, something goes wrong, you need to check something. How do you manage? Because you, if I'm understanding correctly, you manage all of the properties that you have outside of New Jersey.
Yes. So I had to learn through trial and error, because the first time we pretty much closed on the property. And then after that, I got to work, started calling all these contractors. But I did come up with a list again through using like the networking groups that I'm on. I was saying, can anybody recommend a plumber, HVAC guy, all of this? That was my first property. Now, fast forward to the latest property, I already have a team before I go to the closing table. So I already know who the contractors, I already talked to them. I already, showed them the property, maybe through Zillow or through Realtor. They already have an idea of the scope of work. They already gave me an estimate
Mm.
before we even closed. So I have that idea. I have that team built. And a lot of that team building either is through networking or it's by asking like the realtor, who is the contractor that you would use for your own house? If they're telling me, oh, this is the cleaner, this is the contractor, this is so and so, then I'm usually going to go with them more than anybody else, you know?
Okay. Yeah.
But I'm still going to ask other people and still talk to them and get an idea of like the scope of work that they can do.
If folks are like me, like I'm such a, it's right now, it's funny because my husband and I are considering, next location, right? I have to physically go and walk through the rooms. Do you do that for every single property or is everything done remotely?
We have bought properties without even seeing them.
Mm.
And that
And has
sounds
there been has that
crazy.
experience been the same as the ones that you've seen that you've actually went to see?
Sometimes it's just like a surprise, like, oh, wasn't expecting this. Or it might be the location. Again, like, and people listening, please learn from my mistakes. Sometimes a property might be beautiful. It might look great. You might be like, is this too good to be true? But you need to go on like Google Maps and you can still walk the street through like the satellite images. So you have an idea of the street and the area that you're in. So now that's another thing that I did because one of our properties were like, oh, it's a little rough around the edges. Like I wasn't expecting that,
Yeah.
Still, it's a great property and it's a great location. It just happens to be like the street leading up to the property is not like ideal, but people still love the place. But that's something that I learned. Make sure that you use Google Maps and get a feel of the street.
Staying along with the theme, buying out of state, you talked about that in the process that you go. You and your husband specifically do this for short-term rentals as opposed to long-term. And so talk to us about the difference between the two and why that's the route you all go.
Long-term rentals is going to be the more passive way to invest in real estate, right? Because you're not dealing with tenants on a weekly basis. But when it comes to cash flow, it depends what your goal is, right?
Okay.
So if your goal is, I want to have this amount of cash flow, maybe because I want to be financially free from my job, which is actually the route that I'm leaning towards. That's why our focus is cash flow, where other people's focus might be, I'm fine with buying in a great area, having a long-term rental and knowing that it's going to appreciate in 20 years from now. My cash flow could be $200. This is for like other people. They might be okay with cash flow of $200, but knowing that it's going to appreciate because it's in a class A neighborhood, which is like, the top type of neighborhood. Whereas for us, our goal is cash flow. So how our formula pretty much is that in order to find that cash flow is we have to go to specific areas like the Midwest. We're making a little bit more money than other areas of the country. So we're trying to take advantage of that and then go to the Midwest. Mind you, I'm a teacher, so I really don't make much money compared to like other people. Still, we're just trying to figure out like how can we get the most cash flow. So that's why not only do we go to the Midwest, but we specifically will rent out for short-term rentals because short-term rentals are giving us 3 to 4 times as much cash flow than a long-term rental.
So if somebody is thinking about doing this out of state and an area that you talked about where your dollar can be stretched, and then what sort of expenses are attached to short-term rentals, that would have to be deducted from the cash flow that comes in.
The same way that you're used to paying certain expenses in your own house, you can kind of predict on what it would cost for another house, maybe that's similar in size, right? So if you're in a 3 or 4 bedroom house, you can kind of predict like what the electric bill is going to be, what the heating bill is going to be. But then you do have to take into consideration where the property is located. Again, our learning curve was when we had the Pocono house in the winter, our expenses were really high because 1, we had a fireplace and 2, we had electric baseboards and those are really pricey. And then if you have the high ceilings, you're paying even more, right? Depending if it's in the summer or if it's in the winter. So you kind of have to factor those in. So what I would do is I would kind of have like the spreadsheet. I mean, at this point, I already have an idea of like more or less what things are going to cost, but I do keep in mind like properties in the Poconos or a property in Wisconsin, the bill is going to be a little bit higher in the winter than like what it's like for our property in Missouri that's more south. So once you have an idea of like, this is what your expenses are, then you want to make sure that the numbers make sense, right? So you want to have an idea of, the website I use, there's a few websites I use. One is called Data Taboo. Another website is called AirDNA. So you can have an idea of like how much you should be expected to generate. And then you're going to take a look at all of your expenses and see what the mortgage is going to be, all the expenses for electric, for landscaping, for water, for sewage, cable, or internet, things that like you wouldn't have to worry about for a long-term rental, but for a short-term rental. And then my number is always if I can make that amount of money. So I figure out what do I need to make in 7 days. If my expenses can be covered in 7 days, meaning, or another way, like if all I could do is just rent every weekend, all my expenses are covered, then that's a yes in my book. Then I can continue on with them. And then when it comes to cleaning fees, the cleaning fees are actually tacked onto the Airbnb. Like when you're actually like you're staying at an Airbnb, when you actually book, it tells you what the price of a cleaning fee is. And that's actually coming from the owner, from the host.
Okay, got it.
So depending on the property, depending on the location, right? Like some areas, let's say in Pennsylvania or New York, they know their value. So cleaners might be charging $200 for the cleaning. So I might pass that on to the guest, right? Whereas in other locations, my cleaner's only charging $100 or $150. So it might be cheaper in those locations. So more or less, whatever the cleaner is charging me, sometimes what hosts or owners like to do is just have a little bit of extra wiggle room for like supplies and stuff.
Yes.
They tackle that onto the one of the booking fees that the guests are actually paying. So it's not really part of my expense.
Okay, got it. And when you talk about those 7 days, are your property is there a method in choosing state properties in states where people visit often? Like I can see Atlanta, I can see, maybe, even in somewhere in California, Florida, but the states you're mentioning, do they have that many people going there that want Airbnbs? Because as I think about it, I can understand again the Midwest and living here and wanting to purchase there for obvious reasons, but it's also a place that that seems not visited often. But maybe I'm wrong in that. I don't know.
Yeah. And it wasn't until I really started exploring new locations, like, like looking at the map on Airbnbs, like, whoa, why are there like thousands of Airbnbs in this location? Why is like this website I use called AirDNA that gives you a lot of this data? Why is it saying that this is a great location? Like, I would have never thought about that, not too long ago, like I had never had a desire to visit these areas, but I think that has I'm also like a big time explorer, like adventure. I like going to new places. We as a family, we do. And so like, that's also given us a reason or excuse to travel to new places. But yeah, so it's funny because I think us on the East Coast, besides going out to Cali, we kind of stick to the East Coast, right? Like we might go up north or go down south to Florida, but we don't really venture out too much. At least a lot of people I know, we don't really venture out to the Midwest. But after going to these places, I tell like all my friends, I was like, you guys have to visit there. Like there's so much to do. And then when I started doing my research, I realized like 10 million people are visiting this area. It's just that we didn't know, but no, I do like to go to places not so saturated. Like there's certain areas in like Florida, right? Like Disney that are so saturated. I'm not looking for places like that. But ideally, my thing is to go for like these drivable locations, right? Like, so people who are on the outskirts of the Midwest, they'll all drive there, right? They're not probably flying into these areas. Nobody flies into the Poconos either, right? But like people drive in these drivable locations, and then you can just do a quick Google search. How many people are visiting Poconos every year? You'll see 20 million people are visiting Poconos. So there is a demand for short-term rentals,
Wow. And see, I live on the East Coast and I think about the Poconos, and you're right, people do drive there, but I also know that people are very interested in the hotel configurations that they have there, right? And what's offered in there. So to me, again, that's why I love having conversations like I have on this show, because you just get opened up to so many different things. So that's interesting that some people opt for the Airbnb stay as opposed to the local hotels that they have there. So okay, now one of the things that I know that you've shared with me, and I've heard it both ways, so I'd love for you to share your experience. You are the property manager for all of the properties you have in all the locations, and obviously you don't live at every place that you have it. So talk to us about the pros and cons that you found in doing that, because I've heard one of the people that also do what you do, maybe not for a short-term perspective, but buy and rent long term, one of their successes have been having people on the ground, on, supporting their endeavors wherever they may be. You do it from New Jersey. How does that, how do you navigate that based on where you live and where your properties are?
Yeah, so I think what happens is we want to treat these short-term rentals like a business as they are. And what
Mm,
I've learned, because the Poconos was a drivable distance for us, but when we started venturing out to Wisconsin and then Missouri, and now we are looking at other states right now, we realize that you really have to put your systems in place,
mm,
because you can't just drive out there on the weekend. You're forced to make it like this business. You're forced to not go there and clean. Let's say if you're an hour away, like, no, you can't go clean. You need to have your cleaner in place, right? And so it was forcing us to do that by going further out. But again, we still do have a solid team in these locations. But
mm,
part of our systems, part of my requirements is that when my cleaners are going in, they're sending me pictures before the new guest comes in. So
mm.
yes, I don't have my eyes, I can't visually see, but I need to see a shot from like kind of every angle, like outside of the room, to make sure like things are okay,
Yes.
because I can't go in there.
Yeah.
But, the same way that I can do that being 1,000 miles away, yes, I could do that if I was closer, but I don't need to be, right?
Yes.
And the same way, if something were to break in the middle of the night at my property that used to be 5 minutes away from me when we were long-term rentals, the same way I might call a plumber, I'm still might call a plumber for somebody in Missouri, right? It's the same way, you're still picking up the phone. So if somebody's 10 minutes away or 10 hours away or 20 hours away, you're still doing those same things.
Okay.
Right. So I'm not a plumber. Like, I wouldn't be able to go out and fix anything. So either way, I need to make sure like I have established my team, and that I have like reliable people. And so
Okay.
every property that we have this solid team, and we do have like those reliable people that we can count on, but they're also working with me because they know I'm far away, and they know that I'm very like on top of being like, I love like this hospitality business, and that's everything to me. And I just
Yeah.
want to make sure everything is perfect for the guests, and they understand that. So that's why they work with me, and they show me these pictures, and they know like that this is just what I'm expecting, my
Yeah.
high expectations.
Now you said at the top that this business is you and your husband work together in the real estate business. Do you all have defined roles? Like you mentioned, you're the property manager and you have certain expectations. Does he also in New Jersey? Is there certain things that he does within the business, or you or both of you the property managers of all of the, like, how do you all work it from that perspective?
Yeah, so I pretty much deal with like anything in terms of if something goes bad, like my cleaners are the eyes in my property, and they're
Yeah.
the ones that have direct communication with me. So on a weekly basis, after every cleaning, I get pictures from them, and it's to this point that we have this great relationship that they will tell me. Actually, I got a message today, and it said like, we're running low on hand soap, on s'more stuff, because I leave s'mores in one of my properties, like just for like families could do s'mores at the fire pit.
That's
And
so
so
cute.
and so they were like, we're running low on this, but I'll have it by the next, by the end of the next time we come to clean. So like it's already like established and set. I have that strong relationship. But if they were to tell me that, we need this done by a contractor, actually in one of my properties, they'll just call the contractor themselves, because I have such
Mm,
a great relationship with her, and she has a great relationship with the contractor too.
okay.
She was like, oh, I already called him, he already went to the store, he got this fixed for you.
Okay.
So it's about just building these relationships,
Okay.
and I'm pretty much like that person. But my husband is very hands-on, and when we had the Pocono property, he was more hands-on doing things himself. Like,
Okay.
he was putting the floor down in one of the bathrooms, but again, now we're not forced to do those things, right? By
Okay.
buying a fire. Like, I was painting in that house. So we were
Okay.
really hands-on for our first property, but now it's like, nope, we're putting in a business. Like, we're having other people do these roles for us. But still, because he's the handsy person, he might understand, like, if something were to break, he might be able to kind of brainstorm and figure out like, what can we do to fix this? And then he might talk to the handyman or the contractor, and figure things out that way. But for the most like days, regular operations of the system, like that's all me.
Yeah. And if somebody's listening, watching or listening, and they have aspirations to do what you're doing. So talk to us first about people that's already doing it and are at their wits end and want to give up. Like what tip would you have for that person? And then give us 3 tips for people that have aspirations to do what you're doing. And because a few times you've said, well, the growing pains or when I first learned. So now that you're on the other side, what would you tell people to be mindful of when getting started in, buying out of state to rent short term?
Yeah. So I would really say, like, you really just have to get into it because there's going to be learning curves that maybe I haven't even experienced. Right.
Mhm.
But I would say don't be scared of anything
Mm.
because that's sometimes what holds us back.
Yeah.
And so if I would have been too scared to buy that first property, like I wouldn't be at the point where I am right now, where I'm like, I'm already preparing like to leave my full-time job and not too long from now, right? And that's something like at first, like I was thinking this is going to take years, 5 to 10 years, but it's totally doable. And if I can do it, I'm a mom, I work full time, I have 2 kids, my boys are 5 and 9. Like anybody can do this, but you just have to believe that you can do it, right?
Mhm.
You do have to be willing to put in some work. And I will say that it did take me time to realize the markets. Like it wasn't like from one day to the next that I was like, let's just buy here, let's buy there, like it took a while for me. It took a lot of reading different real estate books, reading short-term rental real estate books and networking with people who are already in this space.
Mm.
And then once I felt comfortable, then we went right into it. Right. So yes, now at this point, I feel very confident. We're like ready to make new moves and no going back. But really, I would say just, take action, network with people who are at the point where you want to be. So if there are certain groups like short-term rental groups or out of state investing, like network, if that's something what you want to do because you live in a very expensive state and it doesn't make sense for you to invest there because it's not going to bring you the cash flow, know that there are groups out there that are out of state investors, or you can connect with me, whatever it may be. But there are people who are already doing this and it's not, I would say like, it's not that hard. I don't think it's much more complicated than you buying another property locally, as long
And
as
do
you have
you
certain things in place.
Well, do you are your properties always rented? Like, is there a downtime in one of the geographies where okay, this from this time, like I'll just use an example of Florida. Florida for the winter months, a lot of people from the north go down to Florida because it's warmer, and then they come back. So maybe those whoever have Airbnbs there, maybe those properties don't turn over as quickly during the months that they're back up here in New England. Does that happen for your locations? Are there times where every weekend, every day, your properties are rented, and then the contrast to that is sometimes they're not rented at all for that? And do you plan for that
So,
accordingly?
yes. So I would say every weekend it's booked.
Oh, well,
Any
that
property,
all
every weekend.
properties.
All properties every weekend.
And
It
how
doesn't
many
matter
properties
when.
do you have?
We recently sold one. So right now
Okay.
we have 3.
And every single weekend in different geographies, they are always rented. Why? What is attributed to that? Because I know people that are in it that is not the case, and you're not. I know you didn't say Atlanta. You didn't say places where people are frequently, well, that I'm aware of that people are frequently travel into. What do you think is attributed to yours being rented all the time?
You have to make it stand out.
Okay,
Yeah,
and
that's the
like what
key.
what is an example of that?
I just love designing spaces.
Uh,
And so even if you're not a designer, it pays to get someone to design your space.
okay.
Because when you have different things that make it unique or you're catering to certain people, then it will always be booked.
Mm.
And one thing that I focus on, because we've been doing Airbnbs for as long as I can remember. I mean, like at least 2 to 3 times a year, we're at a different place in an Airbnb. So
Okay.
we've been chose that over hotels.
Oh, you mean your family staying
My
at Airbnb?
family
Okay,
personally.
got it, got
So
it.
like even though I haven't been, having a personal Airbnb for that long, but I've been aware of certain things and I know what I want for my own family. So
Got it.
something as simple as like plastic plates for kids and cups for kids. Like I have a high chair and a pack and play, like things like that I offer to my guests, right?
Okay.
So it's one less thing for a family to worry about.
Yeah.
So if you offer these types of things, you have a beautiful place, like you're going to be booked because people are always traveling to these locations, even
Okay.
though, a lot of us might not have known about them, but they are in areas where a lot of people are traveling. And yes, when it comes to like, for example, you said Florida, there are places where in the winter months that they're completely empty, right? I
Yeah.
know also like Jersey Shore, it's completely empty. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if your gross income is going to still cash flow you on average per month, right? Even
Mhm.
though, like, let's say Jersey Shore, you made all your money in 4 months,
Yeah.
but you still gross more than many other locations,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter as long as, again, you're treating it like a business and you're like holding your reserves to pay for everything else.
Yeah.
There are going to be locations that have like that occupancy that fluctuates.
Mhm.
So you do have to make sure you're prepared for that.
Yeah, and as far as properties, marketing of your properties, do you just by sheer factor of having it available where people go and purchase Airbnbs, or are you marketing it in addition to it just being an available location for rental?
Yeah. So you mean like a separate website for
Yeah,
the
like are
properties?
you doing any other promotion of
I
your
have
properties?
I haven't done anything yet.
No. Okay.
It is something that I do want to look to do. So we do have two of our properties. We have on Airbnb and VRBO.
Hmm.
One property is so busy, like just on Airbnb, like there's no need for anything else, but it is something that I do want to like put some time into creating a website for it. It's definitely,
You
a
don't
plan
have
for the
to if
future.
you're white. If you're renting it every weekend, there's no need for that. At least with the ones you
Yeah.
have now.
Yeah, but sometimes it's a matter of like when you're using this third party and you're relying on them so much, they could do some things, right? Like
Mhm,
if you get a bad review, like a really bad review,
mhm,
and I've experienced this too with like a nightmare of a guest.
uh,
If you have, depending on how many reviews you have, because it does take it into average, but if you're just starting off and you get this one bad review, you actually go like on one of the last pages of Airbnb, and so nobody
uh,
sees your property, So when you
uh,
think about stuff like that, like, oh, come on, Airbnb, like, this was the fault of the guest, and it wasn't my fault, like, so sometimes you deal with stuff like that. So
got it.
it is good if you could market somewhere else and then it wouldn't matter, right?
Okay, got it. Understood. So, is there, so I know you, Christina, you've shared so many gems. Oh my gosh. Is it anything that you want to additionally share with those that are listening that are considering, or if they want to find you, where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can connect with me on Instagram is usually where I am.
Uh,
I talk a little bit about my real estate journey. I talk a little bit about personal finance. I talk a little bit about what it's like to be a mom and like making sure that we're talking money in the household. So on Instagram, my handle is she runs the numbers. Um,
I love that
so
so much.
I have a math degree. So I told you I was a little like, I'm nerdy when it comes to math, but I love running the numbers in real life situations, right? Like running these real estate deals that make sense for us. So it's totally doable. You can connect with people, like I said, who are already in the space. Don't be afraid. You want to take these risks. And I'm telling you from experience, like, I'm so glad that I started. And, like once you get into the space, you just think about like, man, I wish I would have started sooner, right?
I
It's
know.
like what
Yeah.
people say when you learn about investing, right?
Yes.
Like, what's that one thing everybody says is like, man, I wish I
I
would have
wish I
started
known
sooner,
better.
right?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly. And that's actually why I think we both are sweet spot is working with younger people, because had we known what we know now then, when we were their age, my goodness, I say it all the time, like, oh my goodness, it just, oh my goodness. So I love working with young people getting started out, making sure that they understand understanding how they can do things in with their money differently than some of us did when I was their age. I just pause when I talk about it because I'm just like, oh, had I known, had I known. So a lot of times I find where young people don't realize or want to be in certain rooms understanding or learning about it until they get in the room. Then most recently I had an event with high school students. Some of them wanted to be there, some of them, their parents or guardians, made sure that they were there. But once they were there, like, they didn't want to leave. Like, they were so engaged in the content. So that's why I'm such a huge proponent on people teaching young people about money, about the various different concepts and how to do things differently, how to think about it differently. So I love that you said that you worked with, you work with K through college age, and it's just amazing. And I'm always inspired by those that choose that audience, because oftentimes they're not our purchasers, right? But it's still the people that need the content. So I'm always inspired by those that are interested in teaching the youth. So in our show notes, we will have where you can find She Runs the Numbers. Is there anything else you want to tell them about that you have going on?
Yeah, I mean, so additionally from what I have with real estate and me
Mm,
managing the properties,
uh,
I also do speak at some events, or I will do some professional development for other teachers who are in the financial literacy space. So then I also, like, upon that, I realized that, parents really need some extra support. So I created a Parent and Me course, really to engage more parents to have these money conversations at home with their kids. So yeah, I can share the link with you for my Parent and Me course. I have like a stocks and real estate course as well, so I can share that with you too. But again, like, just connect with me on Instagram if you're listening, and if this is anything you want to talk more about, or just be inspired, or just follow the journey. I'm not done with my journey. I still got a long way to go.
Well, Christina, thank you so much for being on the Money Exchange podcast, or on YouTube. It's My Money with Patrina Dixon. I always appreciate all of you for listening in, tuning in to every episode. If you're new to hanging out with Patrina Dixon, I appreciate you. Make sure on YouTube you hit that subscribe button down below wherever you're listening to the audio. Make sure it consistently is in your playlist by following wherever you are. So again, thank you for rocking with us. All of our information will be down in the show notes, information for Christina and everything you heard from her, as well as some nice resources that I have available for you as well. So make it a great day.